Hello, my darlings. Hello. This is Micah Riot, back at you with another episode of Ink Medicine Podcast. It is Thursday, September 28th. And today on my podcast, you're going to hear an interview with Shannon Home. Shannon's work caught my eye because I love blackwork. I love creepy, haunting, beautiful blackwork that she does. It has themes of fairy tales, nature, the occult, what's beyond. Shannon has been tattooing for 6 years. She is just the sweetest human, as you'll hear. She's a mom to 2 gender diverse children. Shannon works with a trauma-informed lens, and she's also part of the eligibility community, as we speak, or the queer community, for those who did not see that one viral video. Shannon's work is absolutely stunning. Her Instagram name is Brambles in Black. I will link it in the show notes. Her shop that she is a part of is called All Sacred Tattoo, which is located in Denver, Colorado. And now, enjoy the conversation. Well, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I love your name, Shannon Home. Like, it's so cozy, obviously.
Thank you.
Tell me about your name, maybe. I don't know if that's your given name, a name you chose, and you can frame that however you want, because people ask me if Micah Wright is my name, and I just go, that's a rude question. Excuse me.
It's funny how often people ask things like that, actually. But actually, Home is a chosen name. It was not my given name. I recently changed it from my married name. I had my partner's name for 20 years. And decided I wanted to kind of connect to my roots. So it's actually the name of the Scottish clan that my family and my ancestors belonged to. And so as I'm learning more about myself and my history and my traditions, and the things that we kind of as Americans are a little more disconnected from, I thought that it was a really awesome way to kind of incorporate reconnecting and reclaiming some of that. And so I just in the last year actually changed my last name to Home, as sort of a celebration of that and as a place to come back to. That's what the other piece of it that I think that means a lot as we're all kind of walking through this human experience. That it's such a powerful word because that's where we come back to, in ourselves and our places and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the meaning and the decision behind that choice. So,
and like as a tattooer, I think, like I feel like every tattoo we get, even if we don't realize it, it's about making our body more of our home.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those things that just felt right. And exactly like you said, like I've been working, we all work, our whole lives to find that sense of like belonging and that sense of home. And I think that tattooing has been a really profound piece of that for me. So
how long have you been tattooing?
6 years. It'll be 6 years next month, actually. So
how did you come to it? How did you start?
I think like I'm really thankful that I actually wound up starting a little later in life. I didn't start tattooing until I was 35. And it was one of those things that like as a collector, I mean, I got my first tattoo when I was 18, and just didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
And just loved being in the shops and asking all the questions to all the, I at one point had an artist tell me to like, just be quiet and let him finish tattooing because I had too many questions. And so
Rude.
I right. It's always been one of those things that are in the back of my head. And, being a tattooed person, people would always ask like, oh, are you a tattoo artist? And it always like broke my heart a little bit to say no. And there was always that little nugget in the back of my head that was like, maybe someday. And, I finally had a friend that was a painting professor, and we talked a lot about painting. And he's also a tattoo artist. And for a long time he would tell me like, you'd be really good at this. You should think about doing this. And I would give him all kinds of excuses why it wasn't going to work. And finally one day he was like, all of the things you're telling me are just because you're afraid. You know that, right? Like these aren't valid reasons why you can't do this. And I was like, dang, you're right. I can't argue with that. So I'm thankful, that to have had a person in my life at the time that held my feet to the fire a little bit. And so I went and talked to the person who owned the shop that he worked at the time and found myself a mediocre apprenticeship to cut my teeth on. Like, I think that's the story for so many of us that, we have an expectation around what an apprenticeship should be based on, if we came up in the American school system and we have rubrics and standards and checklists, and that's not at all what tattooing is. So
I think it can be though, like I think I've
right.
heard of people getting those apprenticeships. I was just kind of like do whatever, learn
Yeah.
whatever you can. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So very thankful for the people who were willing to let me be bad at something before I was good at something, because that's the process. But yeah, and then I was very fortunate a few years into practicing as a tattooer to be able to kind of be taken under the wing of the person who owns the shop where I'm at now. And so he's very much been a mentor to me, not in the traditional sense, but I've grown so much as an artist and as a human just because of the guidance from him in particular and from the entire community that he's been able to kind of cultivate. So I think that's, I would say it lends more to my education as a tattooer as far as, where my roots are now are definitely in the space that I'm working. I feel very lucky to be there. So
It sounds like a lot of the influences were men.
yeah. Yeah. Which initially was kind of conflicting for me as a female tattooer. I think I try to hold a lot of reverence for the women who really had to forge this path for me to be able to step into tattooing when I did and how I did, because I definitely did not have to fight to hold my own the way that I know a lot of people have had to do before me. And I've, not to say that I haven't encountered some of the sort of cliche toxic masculinity that I think so many people associate
Mhm.
with like traditional tattooers and older tattooers. Because I've definitely been on the receiving end of some of that, but I feel so fortunate that to have had balance, I think, in my upbringing in tattooing, where I've worked in all female shops before, and that's been awesome. But I think that the shop I'm at now, I think we're about half and half of male and female tattooers, and a few that don't claim either side. And I think that diversity makes it a much richer experience. I also didn't love being on the flip side of being in the like she woman man haters club. you know,
Mhm.
so
I mean, I'm thinking even with male owned and male like where's a lot of men in the shop. It's not even like it's the boys that are toxic and that, but the clients can be. Like
yeah,
the kinds of people who come expecting what they expect in a place that is very masculine presenting.
yes, and I would say the shop where I'm at, I guess I've never really thought about it before, like the shop itself can be very masculine presenting in certain shops. The shop that I'm at is not. It's very much I can't say enough good things about it. It really is like such a sweet home. For me, it's the person who owns my shop is a 25-year tattooer, so he has sort of seen all of the the different
Mm.
things that can go wrong. But it's he and his partner own sort of businesses that run adjacent to each other within the same building, and so I think there's this really awesome balance of the male female energy in the space as
Oh,
well.
they're both tattoo shops.
They're not. One is a
Okay.
tattoo shop, and one is I almost hate to describe it as a metaphysical shop because that's technically like the business model it falls under, but it's so much cooler than that. So it's ritual craft it's like every like walk of magic education and history and it's amazing. I feel like I'm not describing it well, but there's an element of overlap between the two businesses that I think really elevates the space so that it doesn't feel inherently masculine or feminine. I think it's one of my favorite things when I have clients come in and they walk into the space and they go, this place feels amazing. Because it means we're doing something right, not just in hanging pictures on the wall or hanging plants up or making sure we have sunshine, but I think every artist that I work with really takes a lot of pride in cultivating the energetic space too.
Yeah.
And treating tattoo as a ritual, as we have this opportunity to sit down with people every single day in this like blood ritual of storytelling. And I think that approach to it really helps kind of level the field of like masculine feminine energy. And of course there's artists, there's ego, like we're all human, it's not perfect, but I think that is one of the proudest pieces of what tattooing has to offer the world and what I'm proud to be part of this tradition, because it's a lot more than just drawing pictures, so
Yeah, and not everybody understands that, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I love that. I love how much you love your shop and your coworkers. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And energy in the shop is for sure like its own separate thing besides like what the pictures are and what the furniture is and how it's painted. And also like I love that you have I'll simply call it a gem magic store.
Yes.
Because I make jewelry and I love gems and stones, and so
Yes. Yeah.
and it's just me in my shop right now. I just have a little private studio, and I have a little dish of like rings I've made that people can buy.
I love
So
that.
yeah, so it's like a little mini version of that.
That's amazing. That's actually, I think, how that shop kind of started. Because the person who owns what is Ritual Craft now was a tattooer when this all started out, and I think it started very much as just having ritual and magic offerings in conjunction with what tattoo is, and it sort of grew from that. So you have like the same backbone there.
A little bit, like a little mini version.
Yes, yes.
So tell us, what is your specialty? And I mean that lesson like it's clear what your specialty is by looking at your Instagram. But what would you say your specialty is in the relationship, the relational piece of the
Mm.
tattoo experience?
Oh, what a good question. I think storytelling is really why I got into tattooing and why I love the entire path of it. I think it's such a profound form of storytelling, and so I before my life as a tattooer, I worked as a yoga instructor. I worked in the birth world as a doula and a childbirth educator, and most of the work that I did in those realms was specifically trauma informed and trauma based work. And so I had, when I started tattooing, totally thought I was leaving all of that stuff on the shelf and, taking a completely different career path. And there's so many things that are relevant that crossed over from that. And so I I do have a significant amount of trauma training as far as just understanding how trauma manifests in the body and how to handle it if it is triggered in certain situations, in certain like physically intense situations. And so I think that really has laid a foundation for how I sit with people. I did at one point, I used to I had it on my website that I was a trauma informed tattooer. And what I found is that it kind of set a expectation of who I was going to be and what I was going to be in my connection to tattooing with people. And so after a few years of operating like that, I took that off my website. Because I'm never going to not sit with someone in a trauma informed way. You don't ever become untrauma informed, right? But
Will you say more to that?
yeah,
So what was more more precisely, I guess, like the piece that made you want to take it off your website? I'm so curious because I had this conversation with Sarah Sun, and like I don't have that on my website, but I also,
yeah,
sit in a similar way.
yeah. Um, I think what I found is that it was, and I've spoken to a lot of artists that are, if you are empathetic in any way, like I think it can be so draining to have someone in your chair who maybe isn't completely integrated in their trauma, and you're holding space for that. What I found is that people were seeking me out more for a therapeutic experience as opposed to actually wanting the art that I was capable of making. And I think that when I took that off my website, I was still seeing the same types of people. But the entire experience was more about me being a container for their storytelling and for them to be able to integrate whatever trauma or experience they wanted to without me being responsible for it. It let me kind of meet people more where they were. And it kind of removed the expectations so that people can come to me and just be their authentic selves and have their authentic experience and have their story and feel comfortable sharing their story. And I can just sit with them, that there's not this expectation. I think a lot of times I think people felt like they almost had to share their trauma because that was my specialty. That was, how they found me, or, that kind of thing. And so it's wound up being, I feel like, a lot more of a healthy energy exchange on both ends, for me to just say,
hmm
this is
hmm
me. And maybe you don't need to know the extent of my education and being trauma informed. And I think for a while that became a bit of a buzzword too, where I think people on the tattooing end saw that that was something that was important, or saw that there was a need for that within the community, and then started marketing themselves as trauma informed without actually having like the education to support that, which I think can sometimes become dangerous if you don't know where those boundaries are and how to handle that. Because I'm not a therapist. I'm not qualified to be a therapist. That's not what my education is. But I can still sit with people in a trauma informed way that allows them to hold their own story. And I'm just kind of a witness to it.
hmm Do you find yourself being choosier now, like after you kind of had both sides of the experience? Are you more choosy about who you work on? Are you choosy at all, or do you take on most people? Like I know you have a following, so you probably
Yeah.
get more emails than you can really
That's,
handle.
another piece of this that I feel so incredibly fortunate to be able to take on only the projects that I feel like are best suited for both of us. Tattooing is always a collaboration, even if it's something, if I draw a flash design and I say, who wants this? And someone shows up that day, it's still a collaboration. And so I think for me to be able to choose the projects that I want to work on to make sure that each of those collaborations are enriching for both of us is such a gift. And I know that that's not the case. It for sure wasn't the case when I started. And so I am very selective with the projects that I take on. Not necessarily just because of the subject matter, because I love storytelling through plants. And, I have specific subject matter that I really love to lean into as an artist. But there's a lot that goes into kind of the conversation beforehand when I'm considering taking on a client too, where I want to know what the story is behind the tattoo. And I know a lot of people, a lot of artists don't, which is totally fine. It's not everybody's cup of tea to want to know the details about your grandma and where she came from and why you chose this pattern or that kind of thing. But for me, the more information that I can get about someone's story, the more permission it gives me as an artist to interpret it. Because I feel like if we are able to nail down what the story is that you want to tell, there's a million different ways that I can draw it. And it winds up resulting in a lot fewer adjustments to the design, a lot less back and forth. And it gives me a lot more artistic freedom if I start from a place of like, okay, let's make sure we're telling your story in the way that you want it expressed. And so I think that like if I start there and I resonate with the story, everything else feels really good. And so that's kind of how I choose my projects. Actually, my intake forms are a little more thorough. I get a lot of really lengthy emails that I read through when people send in their projects. But for me, that's wound up being a very successful way of making sure that every person that's in my chair is someone that I have the capacity to sit with.
And so do you do a Zoom consult first before you have an in-person consultation with them, or, you know?
I don't know. I do like I have a form on my website, and I only open my books. I'm still trying to figure out what the best system is to do it, but I open my books 3 to 4 times a year, and people will submit just during open booking through the form on my website. But the form asks quite a bit of questions that are, I spend a lot of time reading long emails first, and so that's sort of the initial process of saying like, yep, this is totally something I'm interested in. No, this really doesn't feel like it's up my alley. And then I'll do in-person consultations with them after that. Unless they're, out of town, then we'll do it over Zoom. But I really do like to spend a little more time in the consultation process as well. Just kind of getting to know people and getting to know if the project specifically is a good fit for me, and I feel like I am the best person to do this tattoo. But also just to make sure that like we're both kind of energetically on the same page, and that it really does truly feel like a collaboration. I think that consultation piece for me is worth taking the extra time to kind of sit with people. I'll often have hour-long consultations with people before we ever even start talking about pricing and scheduling and all of that stuff. So
And does it ever happen that you then reject somebody after you? Yeah, I assume
absolutely.
it does.
Yeah. And I think for the most part, it winds up being a happy parting of ways. Because I think at the end of the day, if it's not something that I feel like I can do the very best job at, I shouldn't be tattooing it. And luckily, Denver is such a rich community of tattoo artists that if someone has an idea, there is someone in Denver who can do it. And so it's very nice for me to be able to say like, I don't think I'm the right person to tell this story for you, but I think I know someone else who might be. And so I rarely will send someone out with a like, no, this just isn't going to work, without a yes to follow it. I think that that's really important. And I've definitely heard from people who I've said no to who, have come to me for other projects, or maybe they'll pick up a flash design later, who will say like, I'm so thankful for your honesty about what you were capable of doing. Because I don't think people are used to having someone say, I'm not good enough at that to do what you want. This isn't in my skill set. And I say that to people a lot, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's almost like this you having a niche of doing a lot of like fine black and gray and black work. I mean, you really, it's clear like where you like to work, like what your style is. And I think that's lends itself probably really well to letting people know like what you want. This, watercolor rainbow thing is not going to work like for my skill set, but also
Exactly.
Also probably works really well for you getting a following, because people like to know what they can expect from your work, right? So that's pretty cool. Like as somebody who does so much of everything, and I do have my favorites, but I do a lot of different things that people who know my work will be like, oh yeah, that still looks like your work. But I'll be like,
right.
But to somebody who doesn't know my work, it looks like maybe 15 different people are doing my work, which isn't super great for like me building a following, but has been really fun for me being able to say like yes to many different kinds of projects. Not that
Sure.
I'm equally good at all those things, but people kind of expect that I will do whatever,
Sure,
you know?
sure.
And then I still have all this guilt when I say no. So like I had to, I was doing my email yesterday and I said no to a couple of people and I have guilt about it, but I'm like, you found me and you trusted me enough to email me and now I'm saying no to you. Like it feels so
Mm,
heavy sometimes. And mostly you're right. Like they will come back and they'll say, thank you, no problem. Like maybe I'll see you again in some other way. Like I'll come back with something else.
yeah.
Um,
I will say that no guilt is very, very present for me.
yeah.
I'm such a yes person. I'm such a people pleaser. And I think that I don't know that that will ever go away. So, but I think that like, there's no one right way to do this either. I think I'm in awe of artists who can and do create tattoos in multiple different styles. I think there's something really to be said for someone who is sort of a jack of all trades, in the tattoo world, because there's so much potential. And if I didn't tinker in all of these other little things, when I first started, I thought I wanted to do color. That was kind of where I was like, and what people wanted, because that's what people were asking. And if I hadn't taken on some projects that I was like, well, maybe this isn't my thing, but I think I want to tinker with it. Like, you discover those things that you love by taking on all those other projects.
Tattoo trends, like how that's changed through like I've been tattooing for 15 years. And when I started in 2008, first, we had it was like the wall flash was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then the wall flash went away like pretty fast. People wanted custom work. And then I started doing like watercolor and like black lace work and like things that weren't really happening in the traditional world. And I did a lot of watercolor for years. Like I basically kind of paid my bills, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's not something I want on me. Like you can't see this, but I have like a black half sleeve.
Yes. Yep.
That's a blast over, and I just want it to keep going down. Like I love black. Like now I'm just like all black. Like this was a
Yes.
big colorful piece, and it's a raven, but now it's mostly black because I got it
Uh-huh.
redone. So it's like what I like to do on me and what I like to do on clients, like are kind of different things. Even though like black work is cool, but I'm not that good at it.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, like it's shifted so much for me over my course of my career as far as what was trendy. And even though I can still keep doing what I'm doing, for the most part, my clients are a little older. It's not like the 20-year-old kids who want
Mm,
these like stickery looking line worky pieces.
right.
But it's kind of scary. And I don't know, like as a person who's been doing this for 6 years and has like a solid practice of black work, do you feel like is there any shift for you in the trends? Is maybe Denver's different from the Bay?
I mean, I think there will always be trends, right? I think it's so funny to me that things like 90s tribal is coming back around too.
I
There
know,
are
it's
people who are
so
asking for
wild.
that again.
It's
Um,
wild. It was so fucking ugly then. And
right.
like,
And I'm like, shoot, I've covered up so many of these that like, why aren't we doing this again? Okay, here we go.
yeah, I'm gonna
um,
refuse. I'm not doing it.
right. I think I've definitely done my share of. I've dabbled in a few watercolor tattoos. I think fine line tattoos became very trendy there for a little while. I think we're starting to see them aged 6 to 10 years now, and how, understanding like how those things wind up aging or settling into the skin. I think that like there's a reason that those trends sort of die off. But trends in tattoo is so funny because it's not like clothes where you can kind of see the shift happen in real time. Um, Trends in tattooing have to like have that time to sit and for people to grow and to outgrow maybe some of those ideas that they had that they thought were trendy, or were cool. And then we start to see those trends shift like 7 or 8 years down the road. So I'm starting to see some of the very first tattoos that I did. Um, I'm having people come back and having them covered up now because They're like, maybe this wasn't a great idea. Let's do something else. But I think it takes so much longer for those trends to sort of shift, because we need time to integrate those things into our bodies, into our skin. And I mean, shoot, I have tattoos from the early 2000s that are now underneath way better tattoos because not just because they were trendy stylistically, but also because we change as people. And, the stuff I thought was cool when I was 20 is not the stuff that I think is cool now that I'm 40. So I think that like trends in tattooing are a little trickier in that way. But I think something that I learned kind of the hard way, because I kind of initially rejected all of the like super traditional tattooing. When I first started tattooing, I didn't want to do traditional stuff. It wasn't the aesthetic that I liked. And so I just really didn't have any interest in even learning it. And it wasn't until I was a few years in, I was at a shop where everyone was miles and light years better than me. And I was definitely like the littlest fish in the biggest pond. And then the shop owner and my mentor was like, why don't you go back to your foundations? Like, go back and try drawing some more, traddy flash that you would have done at the beginning of your apprenticeship. And I was like, I never did traddy flash at the beginning of my apprenticeship. And he was like, okay, that makes so much sense. And I was 3 years into tattooing. He tasked me with going back and making very traditional flash tattoos. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It's so difficult to simplify that much. But what I realized in doing that was that every successful tattoo follows the same formula that traditional tattoos do.
Tell us.
I think it's either the basic like rules of thirds, of your like black to gray to negative skin. Anything that you can simplify enough to be able to do in one line weight is going to look the same way as a tattoo 20 years from now. And all of those sort of like foundational pieces, I was like, this is what I'm missing in my botanical work. These are the things that I'm missing in having high contrast illustrative pieces, because I didn't have those foundations to start with. And I ate a lot of humble pie, going back and doing traditional flash and tattooing some very traditional pieces, because that was never what I wanted to do. But I feel like I learned so much in going back to kind of the foundations of the art piece of tattoo, and learning a little bit about like this path and like the history of what tattooing has been, And so I think then being able to take that and apply it to a lot of what I'm doing now. I do a ton of botanicals. It's like my favorite thing to do, because I think flowers, while they're trendy now, will always be relevant. If you look back at like Renaissance era paintings, and like their flowers have always been a subject matter. And
also,
I think
decorative motifs are always relevant. I feel like people put so much meaning into their tattoos at first, right? People go, it has to be very deep and meaningful. Some years later, not everybody, but most people go, I just want to be pretty. Like,
yes.
I just want to enjoy it.
Yes. And I think that botanicals, for me, wind up being the best of all of those worlds, because I can help people tell stories that in a less literal way. I have a lot of people who are like, I want something that honors, those kitchen sink tattoo requests that you get, right? That they're like, I need something that honors my grandma, and I want my kid's name, and I want my dog's footprint, and I want all of these things of all of these different creatures that have been important to me. And it's amazing to be like, okay, so what did you love about your grandma? Was it, her perseverance? Let's find a flower that is symbolic historically of that, and let that be the celebration of your grandmother. And then as an artist, I get to make an amazing tattoo of a magnolia, and you can choose to share what that story means for you or not. And I think that then can grow with people a lot. in a way that like having someone's name tattooed on you, as an example, maybe doesn't grow with you. And so I feel like for me, leaning really a lot into botanicals is sort of my way of walking that line of trendiness in tattoos, of being able to like be consistent artistically with the things that make a successful tattoo, as far as like the line work and the contrast and the shading and all of the things I learned from going back and doing some traditional stuff. But at the same time, it lets people have something beautiful and meaningful, and we get back to that storytelling component for them. And I feel like it just checks all the boxes so nicely. And so I think that's really why I've leaned so hard into doing botanicals, because I think it satisfies everything, all of those needs, from a creative and a storytelling perspective.
What do you think about work that is not necessarily built to last in the way that traditional work is, or the way that things informed by traditional choices, technical choices is? I had, I'm in this like ongoing internet fight with a bunch of dudes on Instagram where, somebody posted some stupid meme about how, trad is the way and there's no other way. And I was like, or not, like, not everybody, not everybody is here to make things last 100 years. Like, that's not necessarily the point.
Right.
And of course, all the dudes jumped down my throat about how I shouldn't be tattooing.
Oh my gosh.
But like, I find that a really interesting conversation about like, sure, we want tattoos to look good 10 years out, but also tattoos look the way they do 10 years out. Like, it's just skin, it's just tattoos. There's no magic ingredient in that specific style. Like, sure, it'll be darker and maybe cleaner, but like that other thing can be freshened up or like covered up,
Right.
or like maybe that person will be dead by that point. Like,
Right. Right. I think that is such an interesting line to walk. And I tattooing as an art form is so different in that there's a lot more like right and wrong ways to do things versus painting or working in colored pencil or any other medium, right? And so a lot of times in art, we have the ability to be like, oh, you don't like that? Screw off. It's my art. Like this is my self-expression. In tattooing, there's a lot of rules, I feel like. And so you do sort of have to walk this line between like knowing the rules well enough to break them intentionally and knowing exactly like, okay, if I do this tattoo like this, it's maybe going to be a little blobby in 10 years, but here are things that if you're moving into that from an aware space, that that's what's going to happen, and you're in conversation with your client around that being a conscious decision, I think that's very different than a tattooer who's just doing stuff that looks good right now with no awareness or conversation around those things. I also think like tattooing is art. As artists, it's our job to push the medium. It's our job to not just do things the way they've always been. Like that's the whole point. And so if we lived by those sort of like traddy, this is how you tattoo standards to an extreme, like we wouldn't have cartridges. We wouldn't have the innovations in machines that have, I've seen or been tattooed by, like such a vast number, and types of machines in the 20 plus years I've been getting tattooed. The fact that we can even do fine line micro portraits is mind blowing to me, coming from where tattoo machines were 20 years ago. And so, I think it should absolutely be pushed. I think the mediums should be pushed. And I think that there is something to be said for tradition and for all of the things that our tattoo ancestors have figured out before us as far as what works and what doesn't. And I think that's a really hard balance to find, as a human, as an artist, as a tattooed person, where we're combining the forward motion of this art form with the rich history and tradition of what we know works. And I know a lot of gatekeeping comes in there, which, like I have a lot of opinions on like gatekeeping and apprenticeships and all of those things too. But I think at the end of the day, tattoos are for everyone, and they're not all going to look the same, and we're not ever going to approach them the same way. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it. So,
Well, there's also things that have never existed before, like the kind of white ink we have now that was in existence 15 years ago when I started.
right.
And I do white outline tattoos on people for whose skin it is appropriate, and I see them age, and they age beautifully. Like my partner
Mm,
has, I mean, not aged like 10 years, but 5 years. My partner has some white ink tattoos on her that I did 5 years ago, and they're beautiful. They're still beautiful. They're still white.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of these, tratty people would say like that's not a a good tattoo or whatever that means.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really difficult to know because a lot of what we do in our day to day is based on the things that we've been told work or don't work. And I think for me, that's such an important part of why I choose to work in a group studio environment, because I'm constantly surrounded by tattooers who are better than I am, who know more
Mhm.
things than I do, who have been doing this longer than I do. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. Because if I have questions about, like, if I have a client who comes to me and says, I want XYZ, and I've never personally done that before, the only way that I know if that's going to work or not is based on what other people have experienced. And so that for me is really important. But there's also an element of like, fuck around and find out, you know, like if, if I haven't done it before, I don't know if this works for me or not. And so sometimes there is a level of experimentation, which sounds a little scary when you're putting something permanent on someone's body, you know, but um, one of the challenging things about tattoo, again, compared to any other art form, is you don't have immediate feedback to learn these
Mhm.
things, because your tattoos change after they leave your chair. And maybe if you're lucky, you'll get to see a tattoo you did 10 years ago and see how that aged and apply that information to how you're tattooing now. But there's a 10-year learning gap before you can start making those adjustments in your work. And so sometimes it really is just, well, I think this is going to work. I've seen this work, or I've talked to other people about how this works. And I've also heard people say why this doesn't work. So, how am I going to integrate that into what is true for me as an artist? How am I going to integrate that into how I'm serving my clients and being in conversation with them and being very honest about, like, this might not work. Here are the things that could go wrong with this. Are you cool with jumping in? Or I think where it becomes problematic is where artists will do things like micro portraits, maybe as an example. And there are artists who are incredible at it, and you see the pictures of them brand new on Instagram. Um, and they're
Mhm.
charging, $5,000 for a micro portrait.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, what I've heard from people who are wearing them is that they didn't realize when they got the tattoo that it wasn't going to hold up. And so I think that that's maybe like an ethical conversation and a question there where how much are we in communication with our clients about the realistic expectations of tattoo ideas and doing innovative things in tattoo as an art form? Because I think just communication with our clients about what's realistic is super, super important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, informed consent across the board, right,
Right.
is what we need to do. But I'm kind of at a place of taking our mortality a little bit less seriously,
Yeah.
and just like the mortality, like people being like it's forever. It's not forever. It's until you die, and also it's not forever because you can change it, and you can
Mm,
cover it, you can expand it, you can go over it, you can remove it entirely. Like it's not forever. We don't have
yeah.
to be that precious about it
Yeah.
while
And
taking it seriously
And
enough.
like, how different is that for you compared to the way that you thought about maybe your first tattoo?
Hmm.
Um, because I think that's such an interesting shift in mindset. Like, I know I was totally the person who micromanaged the crap out of my first tattoo. And if the sweet woman who did my first tattoo is still out there tattooing somewhere, like I wish I could find her and tell her thank you for putting up with me.
Do you
Because
still have it?
I do still have it, and it's special. It's not one that I'll ever cover up, because I think that was like what broke my heart wide open for all of this.
Mm.
But I think the way that I approach tattoos now, is very much, it's so much less attached. And I think that some of that comes with age. I will say, like, the amount of openness and flexibility and just sort of like receptiveness to the process with clients that I have that are like past their mid 30s is just very different than people who are getting their first tattoo when they're 19. But I think just that idea of, it's just part of my story of where I am right now. And I don't need to think about what it's going to look like when I'm 80. I don't need to think about what if I hate this in 6 years. Like, if it's important enough for me right now to go through the process of the pain and the experience and the intensity to put this on my skin, then that's important enough to do right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why tattoo has stuck around for most of human history. There will always be that need for storytelling. There will always be that need for sort of that controlled intensity, and to let other people see how hard you were willing to work for whatever it is, whether it's just to look cool, or whether it's to honor something, or it's a rite of passage. Like, there will always be that need for this. And so I think sometimes we get a little overzealous in micromanaging and overthinking what we should and shouldn't do. My therapist always has told me a few times, like, stop shoulding on yourself. Like, we should on ourselves way too much with this stuff.
For sure. It's hard not to.
It's
It's hard
hard
not to
not to.
compare.
Well, and what's right for me isn't necessarily right for you, and that's okay. Like, it shouldn't all be the same. That
Mm-hmm.
would take away from the richness of the craft if we were all doing the exact same thing all the time.
It'll be
So,
so boring. I mean, that's where we came from. It was the 80s and the 90s. It all looked kind of the same. And
yep.
then it took off, like right around the time that I started tattooing, and it was so exciting.
Yeah, I feel like you came into it right at the time where things really started to shift into it being more of a fine art, as opposed to like a lowbrow sort of art form. And I always love to hear experiences from people who were in tattooing before and during that shift, because I came into it when it was, full force in the fine art direction. And so I think that it's really important for those of us who are newer babies to tattooing to have some reverence for where it's come from, and that transition, and that it wasn't always as easy as plug and play. You pick up a cordless pen and a cartridge and you swap it out like markers and you get to just make art. Like, there was a lot that came before that. So it's neat to talk to people who have been through kind of that transition.
And I still use coils mostly.
Do you?
Yeah.
I've used one coil machine. I admittedly wish that I would have learned how to build machines, but it wasn't something that even the person who taught me to tattoo knew how to do.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it's something that like maybe someday I actually should go back and learn.
Well, it's something that I've thought about learning a lot, but I had a interesting I kind of sidestepped the men of tattooing for the most
Mm,
part, because I started at Black and Blue, which is a woman owned, wasn't all women, all queer shop.
yeah,
And then at some point it switched, and there some boys came in and started working there, but it was kind of after I started. And so I went from that shop to another women owned shop, and some of these people were trained traditionally, but none of them really like sat around making needles and machines.
sure.
And then in my second shop, there was no dirty room at all. Actually, we did away with the dirty room in the first shop, started
Mm,
using plastic tubes, disposable needles all the time. So I just kind of sidestepped all of that, even though at the time I started, it was still probably happening in a lot of places.
yeah.
But yeah, and the only shop I'm thinking about, like, I spent some time at Classic with Corey Norris, but he also uses disposables at this point. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
think I think for me, like, it would be more of I like to be a thorough learner, and I like to learn the history of things and learning things just for the sake of learning. And so, from a practicality standpoint, there's no reason for me to stop using cartridges. And I just finally was peer pressured into um, using one of the cordless pen machines. I'd never used one before. I'm pretty My heart is with Dan Kubin's machines, and that's where I've been the most successful. And I know he has opinions on cartridges and that kind of stuff too. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'm thankful that someone put a coil machine in my hand just to say, like, you should learn this. You should try it. You should feel what it feels like to have a lawnmower engine attached to your tattoo machine, and just see what you can do with that. And it was an incredible experience. Probably not something for what I do that I would want every day, but
Mm.
um, I do think that it's a piece of my education that I wish I would have had the history of. I think just out of reverence for where things, how far things have come. Um, and I will say it really makes me happy when we're in a room full of people getting tattooed and the music goes off and it's so awkwardly quiet because everyone is using their silent pen rotary machines. And it just makes me so happy when someone across the room fires up their coil and I'm like, it sounds like a tattoo shop in here.
Totally, right? Yeah, no, I love that too. Even though my clients will be like, this is kind of loud. This other
Right.
person I got tattooed by, that was quieter. And I'd be like, sorry, I just really love coils.
Right. They
And they don't
sound
even
meaner
understand
than they are.
why. They do say that, yeah. Or I'll be like using rotary and then change to a coil, and I'll be like, this sounds like it'll be more painful. I'm like, actually, it's probably gonna be less painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Some
Um,
of those rotary machines are mean.
I mean, because there's more, right? There's a spring, so there's more give in it, so it bounces off the skin more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was gonna say, if you found somebody who could teach machine building and
Mm,
you set up a little workshop, I would come to Denver and pay money and like sit in that room and do that with you.
that would be
Totally.
amazing. I will put out some feelers for that because we have a couple of really incredible traditional artists that in the shop that I work at that build machines and still do that, and it's something I've always wanted to like take the time to learn. So maybe it's time to put that out into the world. And
Yeah, like a day long or weekend long workshop or something.
yeah,
Like I would totally come to town and do that. That would
that
be
would be
so
amazing.
fun.
Actually,
Yeah.
I love that idea.
And
I
I
think
bet I know other people who would too.
that's awesome. That's a really
Yeah.
good idea. Well, and I think that a lot of times there's a lot of Um, man, Instagram is kind of a mean, a mean universe. But I see things all the time about like, oh, these new tattooers, baby tattooers don't even know how to hold a coil machine, or you wouldn't even know how to weld needles, or like you're right. I don't know those things, and it doesn't mean that I'm less of a tattooer. It
For
doesn't make
sure.
me
It does
less
not
of
mean
an
that.
artist, but I would like to. No, I want to know more. I want to know more about this craft. And I think the deeper we can dig into different styles of tattooing and just understanding different techniques, there's something from doing watercolor tattoos that I could probably apply to the way that I tattoo now. There's something from realism tattoos that I could apply to how I'm doing what I'm doing now. There's something from building and using a coil machine that I could probably apply to what I'm doing right now. And I think that we rob ourselves a lot of the richness of this craft by getting so stuck in this is the right way to do it.
Hmm. Or
And
this is the only way I'm willing to do it. This is the
right.
only tools I'm willing to use for sure. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it's hard to, I've worked on my own for a decade now, and it's hard to be in a little bubble and not really have, right? Like all I have is really the internet. And it's
Yeah.
honestly because the shops here charge 50%,
Mm,
and so when I looked at, I was like, maybe I want to go work in the shop again. Well, I can't, like, I have to work so much more to make the
right.
bills if I
And
go work in
that's
a
the other
shop.
huge piece of this that I think maybe a lot of people who aren't tattooers don't realize is that not only are we doing this like rich artwork that requires so much of our time and energy, but we're all running our own businesses too. And there's, I would say, maybe a handful of people who are good business people and good artists.
Hmm.
Most of us don't have brains that work well in both realms of that. And so, um, so much of the decision making process that comes, around like how many clients do we take? How do we pick our projects? What type of studio do we work in? All of those things come down to all of these little things about the business side of things that aren't the glamorous things that go on Instagram. Like people don't realize how much artists pay in booth rent. People don't realize how much needles cost. People don't realize how much we have to set aside in taxes,
Hmm.
if you run credit cards or all of those things.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think the business aspect of tattooing is honestly what leads to a lot of the burnout that comes from doing this as a living. Because I will shout from the rooftops. I think being able to tattoo and make art and support my family is like I feel so lucky. It's the best job in the entire world, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it's so hard. It's never going to be a 40-hour a week job.
Hmm.
And I think that is maybe why people feel a little more protective too, of like, here's how this should be done because I had to work so hard to make XYZ. Or there's a little bit of gatekeeping, I think, maybe around that too, because of how hard people don't realize you have to work to do this work.
And it's not for everybody.
It's not.
That's why there's, the gatekeeping. It's like, yeah, it's a little, it can be a little frustrating to look around at how many more tattoo artists there are. And also to keep in mind, like, my clients will come to me. I got my piece. Like, no one's
Yeah.
taking my piece away, and
Yeah.
if my piece is going away, it's because I'm not doing something. Like,
Mm,
I'm not doing enough of something. I'm not putting myself out there in the right ways. So,
yeah. Yeah. I think that is such a good way to look at it. And if there's any threat to your business, it's because of something you're doing and not because of something everyone else
someone
is.
else is doing. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I know we're going a little. We've been talking for a while, but I wanted to ask you about your relationship with social media because I think that's such a big
Mm.
part of this job at this point and something we all kind of resent for the most part. But I don't know, what is your relationship with it?
I would say resentful is a good word. um, yeah, I try very hard not to complain, because I think that I would not have the career that I have. I would not have the ability to make the art that I make and support my family the way that I do were it not for Instagram. Um, I think that I just happened to start tattooing at a time when Instagram still had a very authentic reach. And so I was able to make connections in ways that people who are using Instagram now are not able to do. Because I think the beast that is social media has shifted so much from what it used to be. Um, and it's,
Can you say more to that?
yeah, I think I love that it's a tool. I mean, the reason we're sitting here having this conversation right now is because we found each other on Instagram. And so I think like those connections are really amazing. I'm getting to meet people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. I get to tattoo people who don't live in Denver, which is really amazing. Um, and I
But
get the
from like
ability.
the authentic reach before, you're saying you built your following back when you could post something and somebody would say, look at this cool tattoo Shannon made and follow
Exactly.
them, and okay.
Yep.
And now you're not getting as much of a,
No,
yeah.
it's not the same. I mean, I was looking just back even at the likes that I had this time last year, and I went from, you know, averaging about 1,000 interactions on each post, to under 100 people
Hmm.
interact with what I'm
Hmm.
posting now. And from a business standpoint, that's terrifying, because it's you have this thought of like, well, what happens the next time I open my books? Do people even know I'm still here?
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that's why it's a tool, but it's not the only tool. And I think that that's why the connections that we make with our clients are so important. And I have to remind myself often that tattooing existed way before Instagram did, and that word of mouth and, you know, your work out living in the world and other people seeing what you make and saying, I want that, is ultimately going to be how businesses survive. And I think there are a lot of tattooers who are very good at Instagram and who play the social media game really well. And that works for them. But I feel like at the end of the day, the artists who are making real connections with their clients and have the same people coming back to them in their chairs or their sisters or their, you know, I'm tattooing now kids of people who I tattooed, you know, when I first started, and now their kids are old enough to get tattoos, you know, and so, so much of it, I think, is just because I made those connections and it has nothing to do with Instagram and social media. So, I'll complain about it. I hate that I can't reach people the way that I used to. I don't want to be a content creator. I hate that I have to make videos now and reels, and I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to do a TikTok dance to get people to look at my tattoos. But I do still think that it is a valuable tool if we can harness it and use it to our benefit. And I'm thankful that I was able to connect with you and to be able to do things like this, because I think that it can be a catalyst to things like this where we get to have these great conversations with other tattooers who maybe we otherwise wouldn't be able to sit down with. But I think it can't be the only tool. And I think we get lost in feeling like that's all there is.
What else do you do for marketing?
What else do I do for marketing? I don't.
Do you do a newsletter?
I do have a mailing list that I send an email out to people when my books are opening. And so I think that that's a really good tool for the people who want to know what's going on and want to get tattooed by me, but don't want to play the Instagram game. I think email is still a really awesome tool that we underutilize. But I think I'm at the point now where I've built enough of a following and I've built enough of those people who are out in the world wearing my work in a way that's recognizable that I don't have to do additional marketing. My shop doesn't have to do additional marketing for me.
People just email, like people just know the shop.
Yeah. Which I think, you know, if I was working in a private studio would probably be a different challenge. I think would definitely require more marketing and things on that end, but it's possible to do without Instagram. And there are plenty of tattooers who are so good at what they do that don't rely on Instagram for their marketing. And so it's not, I like to tell my teenagers that like the internet's not real. And we have to remind ourselves that like life exists outside of the internet. And I say it more to myself than I do to them sometimes, but
it's hard. It's hard to remember that even if you're not a teenager.
Yeah.
How old are your children? How many children do you have?
I have 2 kiddos. They're 14 and 16 right now. So okay. we're in the fun. We're in the fun.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite an age.
Yeah.
Are they attracted to or repelled by tattoos?
Both of my kiddos want them. Okay. I always wondered if that was going to be something that was like they were going to rebel by like not wanting to get tattoos and being, you know, accountants, and that was going to be their like push against me, or that it's something that it was going to be a generational thing. But they both want tattoos. I've tattooed some of their friends who now are turning 18 and stuff. And so it's really cool as a parent to be part of those kiddos' rites of passage into adulthood. I think that's such a cool, like sacred thing that a lot of times, you know, kids don't get that like care around their first tattoo. And so like, I feel really special to get to be part of that. So
yeah, I have the same, like my best friend's Nieblings, you know, one of them is now over 18. I've tattooed them a couple of times, and the other one's coming up. It's like, I think the other one's like 15 and we're waiting. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's so fun to be that person for your people's people
Yeah,
growing up.
yeah. And to see what ideas this next generation of tattooed people are bringing to this too, because
Mhm.
like I said, is it always being a collaboration, like the things that they know are possible and the things that they are experiencing in life and their stories are going to start shaping how we tattoo. And so I think it's really neat to be connected to this next generation of people who are going to be coming to us in order to tell their stories, because that's going to shape how our tattoos move in the future too. So
Yeah. I mean, I have my first apprentice coming right up, this fall, and I'm like, I've kind of been waiting for this person to, not the specific person, but I've been like, it's going to be the right person somewhere,
mm,
and I will learn so much from doing that, from
yes.
helping somebody else learn. It will be an amazing like part of my learning. So, and I'm excited because she's like 23, 24, and
Yeah.
like the fresh blood in my life,
Yes. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something I've said. I don't know that I'll ever go down that path of teaching someone how to tattoo. I don't know. My son talked about wanting to learn for a little while, and I was like, maybe if it was my kid, I might consider doing it. But
That
that's
would always be more difficult. Wouldn't you
I
want to
think
send them
so.
off to somebody else that you think is amazing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a lot of pressure. I'm like, are
Well,
you
it's
sure
just
you
like,
want?
the dynamics of the relationship that you already have,
Yeah.
the clean your room dynamics, that might be
Yes. Yes.
really hard.
Yeah. So I think
Um,
that's so exciting for you, and I applaud you for that undertaking, because it really is, as I'm sure as rewarding as it is challenging to like bring someone else into this craft. So congratulations, that's really exciting.
Thank you. I feel like I'm about to adopt a child,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be. That's the way apprenticeship should feel, I feel like, because that's how you know that you're going to get a lot out of it if you're taking it that seriously. So,
I am. Yeah. I think, I don't know if you're an Enneagram person, but you sound like a two, which is what I am. It's the giver. And it's, there's a lot of ways in which like it's so exciting to give and to be generous. And it's also so we have to be aware of like what's happening so we don't get resentful and we don't
yeah.
give too much and we don't overstep someone else's boundaries by giving too much to them and like
Yeah.
pushing our givingness onto them. So
That's on the nose. I feel like that's that's exactly exactly where I live. And that I think in tattooing specifically, it's funny how many people I think are drawn to tattooing who are like that, who are givers. Um, yeah, I wonder I would love to dig into the psychology of that, of like why is it that people who are givers like that and need those reminders of boundaries in our lives are drawn to this type of work, because it pushes that so much.
hmm yeah, it does. It's so complicated and beautiful.
Yes.
Um, so is there something you would like clients out there, not your specific clients, just clients of tattooers, which is I assuming a lot of my audience is clients, potentials and clients of tattooers,
Yeah.
for people to know, like, is there something like a little nugget of wisdom?
Mm, always ask questions.
Hmm
Artist, like your tattoo artist is just another human, and I know that sometimes tattooers can seem very intimidating, and the whole process being in a shop and that kind of stuff can seem intimidating, but remember, it's always a collaboration, and it's always okay to ask questions, because you should leave a tattoo experience feeling empowered, and you should look at your tattoo when you're done and remember the experience of getting it and be super super happy about that. So yeah, I would say that's my number one advice that I give to my clients and to anyone's clients, is like, please don't be afraid to ask questions, even if your knees are a little shaky and we're a little scary.
And if the person makes you feel like you can't ask questions, like you don't have to get tattooed by them.
Yes, yes, you can say no,
You
which,
can
like,
walk out. Yeah.
yeah, why is young me needed to hear that. I don't know why that's so difficult, but like, you can be like, you know what, this isn't right. So yeah, listen to your gut. That's like the best advice in life, just in general. So
So true.
yeah.
And my last question for everybody is, what is a small thing that's making you happy right now?
Ooh, a small thing that's making me happy right now. Um, Gosh, it's hard to choose, which is so
I
exciting.
mean, you can say a few. You don't have to choose one.
This time of year is my favorite. It's like fall is just I just feel the most alive. So it's
Me too. Me
right
too. Me
now it
too.
is like 68 degrees in Denver, and I'm like sitting under my fluffy cozy blanket, and I'm just like, yes, yes, it's fall time. So that is my happiest little moment right now, where it's fall. It's finally fall. I can't
Are
wait.
you getting some leaves and stuff like that?
It's starting to. We're starting to turn. It's a little later this year than it normally is because we just had so much rain this spring that I think everything has just shifted a little later. But yeah, I can't wait to like crunch leaves under my boots. It's my favorite thing.
I love fall too. It's my favorite. People here in California are all about the summer and they're so like, oh, it's like gray and overcast. I'm like, I live for this.
Right, right. I feel like you guys probably don't get as much of a fall out in California either as we do here. So
Yeah, you have to go a little higher up into the mountains, which I
yeah,
do.
good,
Yeah,
good. Oh, Micah, this was such a joy to chat with you. I feel like I could talk your ear off for the rest of the day. So,
I know, right? I would have to make like 3 or 4 episodes.
right.
I totally chat with you forever. And like I was just in Denver for a wedding. And I was like, this is a really easy trip. Like this is an easy
Mm,
flight. It's a short flight.
yeah. Well, if you ever find yourself here, please reach out. I would love to show you the shop or introduce you to some of our community here because it really is such a rich, wonderful community of people here. So, yeah, let me know if you're ever in town again and you want to stop by.
I would love to. And also like the machine thing, I'm totally serious. I would love to learn about machines. And, if you have someone there, like I don't really know people here who would do such a thing,
Yeah.
but
I have some people in mind. I can put some feelers out and
cool.
see what we can
Yeah.
put into the world. So awesome!
Thank you.
Yay!
Thank you so much for saying like a kind of a blind yes. I mean, I know you investigate a little bit, but like you don't know me. And, thank you for like trusting that, this is all done with just like the purest of intentions and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of collecting snapshots of our really beautiful community
I,
from, tattooists and also people that I tattoo, like clients. I mean, I'm just like, I'm so excited to do this, and I'm so excited to like get to meet people I would meet otherwise, like you said.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
It feels I this felt so much more approachable than like some of the like big scary tattoo podcasts. So keep doing what you're doing because the world needs more of that like authentic, gentle conversation. So
Thank you. Thank you so
yes.
much.